Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the NITheCS Colloquium. My name is Francesco Petruccione. I'm a director of NITheCS, and today we have a virtual colloquium because our speaker unfortunately couldn't make it to Stellenbosch today. But we are very happy to have Dr. Mary-Jane Bopape with us. Hi, Mary-Jane. Mary-Jane is the managing director of the South African Environmental Observation Network. And she studied meteorology at the University of Pretoria. She was a postdoc at the University of Reading. She worked for the CSIR, for the South Africa Weather Service on weather and climate studies. She's very active in the supervision of students at many universities. She received lots of awards like the Climate Research for Development Fellowship, the Ames Women Fellow in Climate Change Sciences. She was recognized by the President of South Africa in 2019. She received the World Meteorological Organization Award for Young Researcher, and she was the president of the South African Society for Atmospheric Sciences, and probably there are many more influential awards that she received. Yeah, and Mary-Jane published recently an interesting paper on weather-related disasters in South Africa. Yeah, and every time we read the news, there is some flood somewhere. Yeah, so it's very interesting and useful for us to hear the status of this research from the people who do this research. So Mary-Jane, we are very, very grateful that you made the effort to be with us, even if virtually today, and hopefully soon you will visit us in person. So Mary-Jane, if you would like to share the screen, you're more than welcome to start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Petruccione, and thank you to the whole NITheCS team for inviting me to share work we have done on the weather disasters. So I am sharing my screen. If you can just confirm that you can see the presentation in presentation mode.
Yeah, now we can see it. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. No, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for making the time to listen to this presentation. I will have a number of parts to it in that I think first I'll just start by introducing where I work, and then I will talk about the study that Francesco has mentioned, and then I will talk about some of the interventions that we are undertaking at the National Research Foundation, specifically at SAEON, the South African Environmental Observation Network, that link up to what is necessary in terms of early warning systems. I think you can see from my template that I work for the National Research Foundation. I think I developed this slide after I realized that most people assume that the South African Environmental Observation Network is an organization by itself. However, we are a business unit of the NRF. Those that are postgraduate students, or actually generally within the academic space, a lot of people know NRF for the bursaries that are provided to postgraduate students at honors level, master's, PhD, and we also give some funding to postdocs. And the unit that is responsible for that is the one that's abbreviated there as REISA. And we are also active in science engagement. We engage school learners, school teachers regarding science-related careers. And SASTA is responsible for that. But the NRF also hosts national facilities, and their mandate is really to provide research infrastructure that is supposed to assist researchers across the country. So we fall under what we call Program 4 within the NRF. It's called NREP, National Research Infrastructure Platforms. We've got two that work within the astronomy space, SAEON as well as SARAO. We've got one in the nuclear science space, which is Itemba Labs, and then within the environmental science space, we've got the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity as well as SAEON. But this presentation will really just be focusing on what we are doing within SAEON. Just a further introduction. This is really just to show that SAEON is actually located in a number of in different parts of the country. So where you see the red dots there, we've got some offices, and then where you see the green dots, that's where we would like to establish new offices. So we focus. So basically, the way what we think of in terms of our vision is that we would like to establish world-class environmental platforms for a sustainable society. We've got 7 nodes. 4 of the nodes focus on terrestrial sciences. So we are interested in understanding how things like the biomes are changing and how we are also engaging with the environment. And then we have 2 nodes that focus on marine sciences. One focuses on coastal research, and then we've got one that focuses on offshore research as well as polar sciences. Then we've got Ulwazi node, which is responsible for our open data platforms. And we also host 3 research infrastructures that are part of the SARIR program, the South African Research Infrastructure Roadmap. So as I've indicated, so the last slide there just speaks to the new offices there that are shown in green. So I think under normal circumstances, it's a pity I was not able to come in person, but you can see we actually have some presence there. That we've got quite a bit of presence in Cape Town. We don't have an office in Stellenbosch itself, but then by observatory and within the CBD of Cape Town, we have 2 offices. Okay, now to the study. So we conducted this study where we wanted to ask the question, where are the weather disasters occurring in South Africa? And we also wanted to ask, what are the weather systems that are responsible for these disasters? You can see there that I've got many co-authors there because, when we thought of the idea, we actually wanted to just discuss the study with a number of people, and everybody just said it's information that is really needed. And part of the reason we also conducted the study is that a lot of what we saw came out as case studies focusing on, specific events. But then when we watched the news, we could see that it really looked like some of the areas within South Africa are reporting more disasters compared to the others. So with this study, we really wanted to answer that question and really be clear and say, based on data that is available, this is where South Africa is really reporting weather-related disasters. The data set that we used is an international database. It's called EM-DAT. A lot of people know it as EM-DAT. The database, they are very strict in what they in the events that they list or in this database. If you've got an event, it has to meet one of 4 criteria in order for it to make it into this database. One, there has to be at least 10 fatalities, and then that would mean that specific event will then be listed. Or there has to be at least 100 people that are affected by the event, or there has to be a declaration of a state of emergency, or there has to be a call for international assistance. The one issue we struggled with basically to get the paper published were questions regarding whether this was a suitable data set for us to use. And my last point there is basically saying, in terms of local data, was there a data set that we could use that is here in South Africa that is collected by South Africans? And we are aware of 2 data sets. One is called the KLAM, which is a record that the South African Weather Service is responsible for. For this particular record, they take what is reported in print media and then they list events just based on that. However, we thought for our study, we would not use that one because even at the South African Weather Service, they are now in the process of developing a new database because they feel there's inconsistency in terms of naming the events and then also in going back to confirm if the events have occurred. So we thought then it was best for us not to use this particular database. I also worked on this database in some of the previous work that I have done, which is why I thought it wasn't the best one to use for this particular study. The EM-DAT database that we have used ourselves has been used widely internationally. And then there's also the National Disaster Management Center, which is responsible, like once there's a disaster, I mean, we've got the Disaster Management Act, and then it gives, responsibilities to different structures, such as the NDMC, the PDMC, as well as local government. But then also when we went onto the NDMC website, we could not really find a database that was long enough for us to use. So in terms of the EM-DAT database that we are using here, it was launched in 1988 as a project of the World Health Organization and the Belgian government. But in terms of the limitations, there are those, and you will see as I present the results, but there is possible underestimation in terms of the events that are recorded there. So this slide just shows, some of the results as they came out. We are focusing specifically on natural disasters. EM-DAT reports natural disasters as well as technological disasters. So we didn't look at technological disasters at all. What came out was that of the weather-related disasters reported in South Africa, floods are really leading, followed by storms. With storms, there are different categories that are included there. If you've got a disaster because of lightning, because of hail, even a tropical cyclone is included within that classification. So we just followed the classification as used by EM-DAT in the way that we presented our results. Then in terms of droughts, we can see that droughts were also recorded there. We've got wildfires. We know, I think the Knysna one is the one that is the people know most about. And then there were epidemics that would include things like cholera. Earthquakes, so these were not necessarily earthquakes, but rather, the tremors that are happening. All of them were all reported. The ones that we see there being reported were all reported in the Northwest, but obviously that's really not my area of specialty, so we didn't focus too much on that. And then in terms of the cold spells, there were 2 that were reported, and then 1 landslide, and then 1 heat event. And I mean, from this, you can already tell that there is some sort of underestimation. We ran a workshop as part of the South African Risk and Vulnerability Atlas program. And when we were showing where the disasters are occurring, and then we could see that people were getting uncomfortable regarding what was reported because they felt like there was some underestimation. For example, we know climate change is happening. We have conducted studies where, using ground observations, we would look at the number of heat waves that have been recorded in South Africa. And so, I mean, the fact that there's only 1 heat wave that has been reported across the whole of South Africa actually shows that there is some underestimation, which is really a limitation of this data set, which actually says to us as South Africans that we need to be collecting our own data set and then making sure that we've got proper criteria so that future studies can be better informed by data that's collected here locally. So the particular heat wave that was recorded here was in 2016, which is when we had that very dry season, the 2015-2016 El Nino, which caused drought across the whole of Southern Africa. So the bar chart that you see there shows the events as they have occurred from 1980 up until 2023, and you can see in the past, like, you could have a year where you have just 1 event that is being recorded, but you can see that as we move with time, we are getting more and more of them getting recorded. And 2022 there stands out as the year when we recorded the peak in terms of the flooding events. And then right next to it, 2023, there were 4 flooding events that were recorded. And then in 2019 as well, we recorded 4. And you can see before that, when we look at our record, so that basically means there are more and more of these events that are occurring. what we also did with the data set, we got one of our junior data scientists, Kgaleletsang Kibine, to take the data and then break it down into district level. So we've got 44 districts in South Africa and 8 metros, just so that we see where in South Africa, like we've got a visual indication, as you can see on that map there, of where are these disasters occurring. So when we put everything together, so that is the bigger map there on the left, and you can see that eThekwini really jumps out as a metro that reports the most disasters. So we know there are 2 metros in the Eastern Cape. Gauteng has 3 of the metros. There's one in the Free State, and then there's one in the Western Cape. But in general, you can see that with the bigger metros, there is some indication that suggests maybe urbanization might have something to do with the disasters as they are recorded. So I already indicated that in terms of the type, floods are leading in number, and then we can look there at the map that shows only the floods, and again you can see that eThekwini is really leading. KZN as a province is leading in terms of these disasters being recorded, and then in Gauteng province you can also see that there is some indication that there are more events some events being reported in Johannesburg as well as in Ekurhuleni. So Ekurhuleni reports more storms, and then Johannesburg reports more floods. And then when you look to the western parts, so look specifically at the flooding one, you can see the in the Western Cape province, you can see the Cape Town Metro also jumping out there. And for us, this suggests that there is a linkage to the disasters are linked to human activities, because with these metros, that is where you have higher population, you've got more built area, and then that is also where you find a lot of informal settlements, and that is why when these events occur, then they will then result in high impact in those areas. Then I said the other question we wanted to ask was, what are the weather systems that are causing these events? Now, South Africa is located in what we call the subtropics. So the weather systems that we experience here are informed by the fact that we are in the tropics, and then the oceans surrounding us also have an impact on the type of weather systems that we experience. So within the subtropics, you really generally have high pressure that is dominating, which is why we've got the semi-permanent high pressure systems in the Atlantic as well as in the Indian Ocean. So when we experience rainfall or these disasters that we are talking about, it actually shows that there is some tropical system or some perturbation, small-scale perturbation that is causing that rainfall, or there is a mid-latitude system that is causing the rainfall. And what we found out was that the cutoff low systems are responsible for the majority of the disasters we experience in South Africa, followed by upper troughs. The upper troughs as well as cutoff low system, these are mid-latitude systems that form in the mid-troposphere. So they form basically above the surface, but then in the way that they work, they promote to buoyancy. They promote. So if you've got a trough axis, so east of that trough axis of such event, you will get a lot of uplift. So if that uplift is associated with a lot of moisture, then you will then get a lot of rainfall. So usually when a cutoff low system is going to make landfall over South Africa, the South African Weather Service would, for example, issue a media release. Even the latest disaster that we saw happening in UMTATA, it was because of a cutoff low system that has occurred. However, but then at the surface, there was also a very strong cold front, and then that was also associated with a strong gradient. Then the ETCs there, so those are ex-tropical cyclones. So South Africa is impacted by tropical cyclones that form in the southwestern Indian Ocean basin. These storms, they come, we know a country like Mozambique and Madagascar are impacted far more than us. But then in the case of South Africa, the period that we are looking at, we've actually only been impacted by 4 of them. There's Domoena, which actually occurred all the way back in 1984. There was Elene in 2000, there was Dando in 2012, and then there was Eloise in 2021. But of course, many other tropical cyclones would make headlines here in South Africa. Idai is, for example, one tropical cyclone that made big headlines. However, South Africa was not impacted. That particular one impacted Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. So I will then jump on to speak to the issue of early warning systems. The figure that I'm showing there is what the World Meteorological Organization came up with when they thought of pillars that are necessary for us to have where we can say we've got a successful early warning systems. On 23 March 2022, the UN made an announcement that by 2027, everybody across the globe should have access to early warning systems. And I mean, that comes because there's a realization that where the early warning systems are mature, you would experience the loss of life that is associated with extreme events as they occur is less, and then that would actually mean you limit the disaster level when you've got really good early warning systems. And they've identified 4 pillars. The first one just speaks to the disaster risk knowledge. So it basically says you need to know what you're exposed to. You need to have some observations and understand what you're exposed to. If you've built in a floodplain, then you will know that you are exposed more than others. And you need to know what are the types of systems that would be responsible for disasters where you are staying. And then the second pillar is observations and forecasting. So that's really the area that I can say I specialize in. So observations, we need ground observations. We also rely on satellite information. And then in terms of forecasting, we have to use models. Then I can have the most perfect early warning system, and if the people that are supposed to react to it do not get to see it, then it becomes a useless, warning. So therefore, as one of the pillars, dissemination and communication. So we can have media releases and things like those, but if people that are supposed to see the warnings don't see them, then they will not be able to respond to those warnings. And then ultimately, I mean, after the warning is issued, then we need to be able to be prepared and be able to respond to those warnings. And I think from where I'm sitting, when we look at where we are in South Africa, I think we are lacking in all these areas. Our observation network is generally better if you compare us with the rest of the continent. However, there are still big needs in terms of our observations. We really need more automatic weather stations, automatic rainfall stations, so that we understand our climate better. And then with the models as well, the models are still not perfect. We need to work to improve these models. And then in terms of dissemination and communication, we all watch on TV as the disasters are occurring. You find the people were just not aware that the disaster was going to occur, or that the extreme weather event was going to occur and their area was going to be impacted. And then in terms of preparedness and response, again, if you tell me there's going to be flooding around my house, I need to know if now I have to leave my house, where do I go? So this actually speaks to all of that. And then the one thing I think to note is that according to the WMO, the area that needs more funding is the observations and forecasting, because that's really the basics of what an early warning system would require. You can improve on your communication and all of that, but if you don't have observations and models that work well, that's also not gonna be very helpful. So I'll jump now quickly into the some of our interventions just in terms of the observations. What I'm showing you here are some of the landscapes that we have within SAEON. So these are the points where we are collecting environmental data. So it's not just meteorological information, but we're interested in what is happening with the land surface, how as people we are engaging with the environment. The different colors on the left, that is the different biomes, and then on the right, that's just the topography. So you can see that we've got landscapes at different points. But this is very different. If you see a map like this shown by ARC or by the South African Weather Service, a dot will mean it's a station. For us, it means it's a landscape where we are trying to collect information at high resolution. So as a result, you can see that there are some gaps. However, these landscapes that we have were selected strategically. So this is just an example of what our landscapes look like. You can see we are out there, we're putting out flux towers so that we can measure the exchange of information between the land surface and the atmosphere. We've got our technicians going out there having to maintain these. We're making sure that we've got we ensure that our instruments do not burn. However, sometimes with some of the wildfires, our instruments end up actually getting burned. We also work within the marine space. The cutoff low systems that I talked to, they generally form over the oceans, and that's why it's important for us to also observe our oceans. And I think we know from seasonal forecasting and all of that, we've all heard about the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We may have heard about the subtropical, we may have heard about the dipoles in the Indian Ocean. So all of those actually tell us that we need to understand better what is happening in our oceans. And now with the G20, with South Africa being the presidency of the G20, SAEON is leading with the Ocean 20 work. So this is an example of one of the dots that I showed. This is the Cathedral Peak, so right on top of the Drakensberg. And you can see, as I've indicated, so this would have been a dot on that map that I showed. So you can see we've got a wide range of instruments. So that dot is definitely not just one instrument that is there. We've got 33, rainfall gauges. We've got a number of automatic weather stations. We've got some flux towers there, and then we are also collecting mercury, but that is in collaboration with the South African Weather Service. So there are a range of variables that we are collecting. This again, just from the Cathedral Peak. So there's an area which we call the Mike's Pass, where we put a number of instruments that we compare against each other. And so the bar chart, it shows you the anomalies in terms of temperature. Below blue says that temperature was below average, and then red shows temperature was above average. And where we see missing data, that was before SAEON took over. It just shows that some of the landscapes that we have taken over, we chose some landscapes where there was work that was taking place, from around the 1940s, and then the work got abandoned, and then SAEON basically came through and then revived some of that work. But then what's important also to see from this slide is where you see, since we have taken over the station, the temperature has always been above average. So that red actually shows you that it has just been above average, showing that, with our stations, we can see that climate change is definitely happening, which is part of the reason why I said we are expecting these heavy rainfall events that would cause flooding to continue to happen, and we are expecting more of them to occur because the rainfall intensity has increased. The temperature is also increasing. This one here is just to show the type of work we do when we study the impact of different biomes on rainfall availability. So when we look at the impacts on, our livelihoods, impacts on water security, we look at climate change, we look at what is happening with the weather and climate. But this one actually shows you that we can disadvantage ourselves when it comes to water availability by the type of by the type of plants that we have around us. So the plot that you see at the bottom there shows you accumulated stream flow since we started making some of these measurements, and then the black lines, that is where we've got a forest or woody encroachment, and then where you see gray, that is where we've got the grasslands. So what this is showing us is that where you've got the grasslands, and when it rains, there is more water that becomes available for us to use, while if you've got a forest, that is now not a possibility. So this is work that was done on 2 of our landscapes, the Cathedral Peak, and then related work is being done around Maputal and Northern KZN, which confirms the same, that we should also be checking, not transforming our grasslands into forests, because everybody feels, to deal with climate change, we need to be planting trees everywhere. Then I will touch on the South African Research Infrastructure Roadmap, SARIR. South Africa launched the SARIR in 2016. So the work on SARIR started in 2013 with funding from South Africa and the European Union, where they identified 13 research infrastructures that have to be implemented in South Africa. And initially, I think at some point there were 17 of them, and then in the end, they ended up with 13 of these. And when South Africa hosted the International Conference on Research Infrastructures in 2016, the SARIR program was launched. And then in 2017, implementation of some of these research infrastructures started. And then within SAEON, we are responsible for the 3 that you see in blue there. We are responsible for the expanded freshwater and terrestrial environmental observation network. We are responsible for the shallow marine and coastal research infrastructure, and we are responsible for the South African polar research infrastructure. And you can see this covers the 3 different areas that I've already mentioned that we are working on. So for FT1, there are 6 landscapes that have been identified where we will be putting up basically similar infrastructure. We have already started, and the new offices, I said, we are putting up. We are actually putting those offices up so that we can have scientists that are based in each of these 6 landscapes. So for each of the landscapes, we've got a landscape scientist and 3 technicians. And then the hope is that then there will also be students that are attached to these landscapes, or even interns that will go and work on these landscapes. We're interested in a number of platforms. Biochemistry, we're interested in the hydrology, the meteorology and atmospheric science, the biodiversity information, as well as the social ecological systems that are associated with each of these 6 landscapes. Then we've got the shallow marine and coastal research infrastructure, SMECRI. The node that is responsible for this one is based in Gqeberha. There are 4 sentinel sites that have been identified. The first one, Algoa Bay, is a site that has been there and has been there for a long time. And we've put up a lot of instruments within Algoa Bay. We are observing, we're checking what is happening with the phytoplankton there, zooplankton. We are putting in cameras to check what's happening with the biodiversity there in general. And then we are setting up the KwaZulu-Natal Bight, the 2 oceans one, and then the 4th one is going to be Marion Island. But then in between these, then we will also have some satellite sites. Then in terms of speaking to the disasters, SMECRI also has an aircraft. So what we do after a disaster has occurred, this aircraft will then, we'll take it to go and collect images of the impact that is associated with that disaster. And that information is then made available to the Disaster Management Center, the local one that is responsible for that area. So you can see that this is not just research, but then it's also useful in terms of assisting in dealing with the disasters. Then the last one is the South African Polar Research Infrastructure. We hosting SAPRI, actually we only started in 2021. And you can see basically the line that the SAEON stood, well, the research lines that is normally followed. At the moment, we've got sliders that we are putting up as part of SAPRI, and we are collaborating with University of Stellenbosch. In fact, so SAPRI is made up of different aspects. We've got long-term observation ocean, we've got long-term observation land, but then we also have the data processing and society node, which is hosted at Stellenbosch. And then we've got the Polar Lab that is hosted at the University of Cape Town. So this is there, but then we collaborate with the community in general. But the idea here is that we take observations, we understand what's happening in the poles, we understand what's happening in the Southern Ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean, and in the Indian Ocean. Then I think I just really wanted to mention the fact that we've got models that are running at the moment within SAEON. We are running an ocean model, CROCO, that runs along the Algoa Bay, and then we've got 2 other domains that are being tested and being set up, working in collaboration with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment. However, I'm showing the other components of the Earth system that the data that we collect can be used for. So you can use our data if you are interested in running some hydrological models, even if you're interested in running some atmospheric models. So our data is open for you to be able to use. We've got a catalog. If you're interested in observations that are collected in all these areas that I have mentioned, you can go onto our catalog there and search for the data that you are interested in, and you will be able to download. And as of last year in July, our open data platform is an award-winning platform. We won the NSTF South 32 Data for Research Award because of this data platform. And we also have the Core Trust Seal. We are due next year. We have to resubmit again to get this certification. But the fact that we already have it shows you that we've got a really good system there. Where we've got the South African Risk and Vulnerability Atlas as part of the platforms that we have. And with SARVA, the hope is that we'll have, let's say, municipalities or even provincial governments or even the academics uploading their data sets onto this platform so that it can assist in terms of decision making. SARVA started all the way back in 2008 as an initiative of the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And at that point, initially it was with the CSIR, and then since 2015, it has been with SAEON, and would really like to see this platform being, assisting in decision making, assisting with, decisions around disasters as they are occurring. We've worked with the DFFE to develop some platforms. We've got the National Climate Change Information System. So this work was done for the DFFE, but that system is there. It's available for people to look at the information, climate information as it's available. And we also have the climate risk profiler. However, I think in terms of how new the information is would depend on who is uploading it. So the most up to date will obviously be the work that we upload ourselves. Then here, I think I just want to mention the issue of when I talked about the different pillars of early warning systems. The issue of communication and dissemination is important when we talk early warning systems, but in general, we are living in this world where being impacted by climate change, things are changing, and you find communities don't quite understand what is happening. So within SAEON, we actually make a point to go engage with the communities where we've got sites. I mean, you can see these are examples. We're putting automatic weather stations in schools, and when that happens, you can see we've called the community community to come and engage. The one you see there with vegetables, that is inside the home of one of the ladies in in Spionkop, in the Spionkop area. So you can see we also put up an AWS there, and again engaged with the community, and sometimes we can just go out there and talk to them about what is happening. Sometimes we get, you know, the elderly and the young people to just engage so that they can talk about what they have seen has changed over time. I'm about to conclude. However, I just want to mention the hackathon, the G20 hackathon. I've already mentioned that South Africa, you know, the South African presidency this year. So as part of the Research and Innovation Working Group, there is a hackathon that is happening. You can see the dates that are associated with it there. You can, if you have any questions, the inquiries can be sent to g20hackathon@tia.org.za. You can register your teams there. So the closing date for submitting, you know, information for the teams is 25 July, and then the teams will then be confirmed between 28 July and 1 August. And then there will be some mentorship and technical support that is provided from 11 to 22 August. And then the hackathon execution itself will happen from 2 to 5 September. And then the hope is that the winners of this hackathon will then be presented, we'll present when the ministers meet, the ministers responsible for science and innovation meet in September. So just to conclude, it's really just a summary that, so what I've indicated, I think with the first part was that we are experiencing weather-related disasters. We're expecting them to increase because of climate change. Our observations here in South Africa are showing that climate change is definitely happening. We know, so the state of climate that the South African Weather Service publishes last year, they indicated that the temperature was 0.9 degrees Celsius higher than, I think the reference period they used was 1991 to 2000. And you can see it is actually more a recent one. While when we look at the global one, we know last year was the first time where the mean global temperature exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, using a reference period, the pre-industrial reference period. However, it's not a long-term one. It was a temporary exceedance. But then that in itself shows you that we've got this climate change that we are really committed to, and it's impacting how the extremes are occurring. And then in terms of dealing with the loss of life that we can see in South Africa, I mean, with the Umtata event, we know there are over 100 lives that were lost because of that event. We need to do better in terms of the early warning systems to avoid the loss of life, and then also look into our long-term planning to avoid more disasters that are occurring. And then I also shared information regarding SAEON, that we've got sites that were chosen strategically. We do have opportunities for honors, masters, and PhDs. So there are bursaries, some are ring-fenced to use our research infrastructure. And then we can also work with the postdocs. And researchers that want to work with us can become research associates with SAEON. And when you're a research associate and you publish with our affiliation, there is some funding that you receive as part of that. And then the platforms are available for everyone to use. And then in terms of science engagement, we are happy to collaborate in that area as well. We work with school learners, with educators, with postgraduate students, and we also run community events. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mary Jane, for a very comprehensive and interesting talk. Do we have questions for Mary Jane? There's a question there at the back.
Okay, so thanks for this comprehensive talk. I've just got one question concerning the early warning systems. So you mentioned that the number of fatalities was fewer in case the that system was mature. Can you tell whether this is really a causal effect, or is this just some kind of correlation? Because one would think that if there is a good infrastructure for these early warning systems, then there is also in those areas, then there's probably also good infrastructure for flood protection and other similar things. So in that case, it would just be a correlation.
Okay, yeah. So I think, I mean, I can mention the example of Singapore, where they've managed to reduce their exposure to disasters because of better infrastructure. But in South Africa, that's actually not the case. I mean, so rainfall, when you're looking at the map, you could see that with these floods and storm events, they're actually more on the eastern parts of the country, and that is where we get more rainfall. We know we've got this west to east gradient, rainfall increasing from the west as you move towards the east, and we know KZN as the wettest province, and as a result, it is we are experiencing more disasters there. And then the fact that you've got eThekwini reporting the most, when you compare the amount of rainfall that eThekwini experiences, is not more compared to the other districts, which is why we can then say there's human impact when it comes to these disasters. But I mean, infrastructure, we know how South Africa is. We've got informal settlements, so we can't exactly say the infrastructure in South Africa is such that when a heavy rainfall event occurs, we are able to deal with this. There are some that have mentioned the drainage systems that are blocked, and therefore when it rains and the rainfall is a lot, is not able to move as quickly as it should. With informal settlements, there are people that have moved to the city so that they can be close to their work, and then they're now living in floodplains, which is why now when you've got these events that are occurring, so you do have a natural aspect to it, but then there's also a human element that says, yes, if we were to do better with our infrastructure, we can reduce this the number of disasters. So the fact that you've got an extreme event does not necessarily mean that you should have a disaster.
Thanks.
I think we have a question from one of the online participants. Daniel, if you would like to ask your question, you're most than welcome. And if you switch on your video, we can also see you.
Hi, Francesco, can you hear me?
Can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, so unfortunately, I cannot switch on my video at the moment. Very interesting and compelling presentation. Thank you, Marjane.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, you essentially mentioned weather-related disasters expected to increase due to climate change. My interest is on the sun influence on climate change. Can you comment on that? Essentially, that you make a big statement to say that weather-related disasters are expected to increase due to climate change. So,
Yeah, okay.
what's the forcing in this
Yes,
regard?
what is the forcing? All right. I think, Daniel, we can just start by just talking about how the process would work. So first, I mean, you've got the shortwave radiation from the sun that comes, it hits the surface, and then the surface would hit the adjacent atmosphere. And then through long wave radiation, that heat has to be released into space. Now, because we have increased the concentration of greenhouse gases, there's more heat that is getting absorbed in the atmosphere. Heat that would otherwise be released into space is basically staying within our atmosphere. And that is why we've got this global warming. The models that we use, I mean, you are a physicist yourself. So we've got conservation of momentum, we've got conservation of energy, we've got conservation of mass. So these are the equations that one would say they represent the atmosphere in the way that it works. And really the equation that you look at as the energy equation, that is the one that you will actually also use to predict what is happening with temperature. So really, as you are increasing the temperature, you are also increasing the energy within the atmosphere. And as you increase this temperature, you are also affecting the weather systems. I mean, the reason why we've got weather to begin with, or these weather systems, is because the amount of heat that reaches the surface along the equator is very different to what reaches the poles. And the weather systems and the ocean circulation are really there to try and transport this heat that is concentrated along the equatorial region, trying to transport it towards the poles. And then as that is happening, you get these disturbances that then result in the weather that we are experiencing. So I hope that answers you.
Okay, more or less, because what we see when looking at long-term trends, especially I'm looking at the ionosphere and more or less photosphere, but essentially ionosphere, we have observed a kind of a negative trend in ionospheric ionization over the last 3 solar cycles. Yeah. But anyway, we can take it over for discussion.
All right.
Because the interest is to look at essentially looking at how the ionized upper atmosphere contribute to the neutral atmosphere, like thermosphere. Like we're talking about ionosphere and thermosphere over a long time. Anyway, we can take that for discussion. It's fine.
No, we can take it off, but I mean, most of our work, we focus in the troposphere, and then now recently we are also looking at what is happening in the lower stratosphere. For example, we would look at the impact of the lower stratosphere on the weather systems.
That's interesting because we're looking at the ionized part of the ionosphere, like for instance, like from 60 kilometers to about 1,000 and beyond. But we can take that for discussion.
No, we can discuss, but like I say, so as a meteorologist, we would look at the troposphere and then we would look at the lower stratosphere, but then let's engage and then to see how we can collaborate.
Definitely, because they influence each other, because if whatever is happening on the neutral atmosphere, it also affects the ionized atmosphere above that. But we can talk about that. Thank you for a nice presentation. Good luck.
Okay, thanks, Mr.
I think we have another question from one online participants. Please, sorry.
Hi, MJ.
Hi, Neville.
Thanks very, very much. Nice to see that presentation. Two points. One is about the classification of extreme events. And you, right at the beginning, you were talking about floods and storms and so on and so forth. And I've always wondered how they distinguish between them, because I've looked at, there's a very interesting chart looking at the $1 billion plus damaging extreme events in the United States and how they've increased over time. But again, they've distinguished between storms and floods, and even compound events, which are both, or wind plus floods, for example. So the classification, how important do you think that is? Maybe it's not that important. I mean, the complexity is that you've got to try to balance the kind of impact, which might be a result of the magnitude of the storm, but it also might be a result of where it hits and what the vulnerabilities are and so on and so forth. So I want just to know from you, how important do you think those are, especially when we're trying to look at the trends in these events? And in relation to that, I think you did mention this, one of the other problems we've got is, I see there's a definition here. The other problems we've got is whether the record of previous events biases in other words, we're much more sensitive to these events and record them better. Anyway, I'll leave that thought there. Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks, Neville. Yeah, the classification of extreme events. I think initially, as meteorologists, we would define the extreme events just based on the meteorological information. For example, if we knew that there was going to be more than 50 millimeters of rainfall, being received in an area, then that would be cause for us to say maybe we need to issue a warning. But the WMO has actually since introduced what they call impact-based forecasting, and that is because the feeling was that it is more important for us to basically to link the two, to say that you've got this extreme event and then you also have the impacts on the other side. So the EM-DAT database looks at the impacts in identifying the disaster. I think you've said it, I think in the past conversations that we've had, that you've got an extreme event does not necessarily mean that you have got a disaster. If you take a heat wave, for example, the definition that we would normally use is that you want to have temperature being above the average of the warmest month for at least 3 consecutive days. And when you look at our data or the work that we have done, it shows many heat waves, but those don't necessarily all result in disasters. However, I do not believe that in the period that we are looking at, there was just one heat wave. I don't know if you've seen, there was a study that was published by Oxford, I think it was back in 2020 or 2021. Where they were saying that the number of heat waves are being underestimated in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at the numbers being reported here and you compare with what's being reported in Europe, there was a really a big difference. I'm not sure I've answered you, but it's I think we really need to consider both. We can consider the meteorological effect, but then the impacts are also important.
If I may, Chair, I'll be very brief. Just to say that it's a lot more complex. Really, it is quite complex to try and tease these things out. But it is important to do so, especially because of trends. And one of the things is, the best example is a fire. We might have conditions which are ideal for a runaway fire, but unless there's ignition, there isn't a disaster.
Yeah.
So that's one example. It's an easy one. With a flood, it's a different story. That depends on where it's flooding and where it's raining, for example. So those and what's in harm's way in that particular case. But it's all important because of understanding trends and attribution. That's why it's so critically important. But okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Neville.
Yeah, thank you very much, Neville. I'm very glad that we kickstarted interesting discussion. Please, there's a question here in front. Don't know when the microphone is coming.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tebogo, focused on earth sciences. My question is for Dr. Mary Jane, is bulletin number 2 on your remarks. When you said, so far what I heard is that from your, first off, I'm not trying to be any disrespectful of any other way. I want to understand the role. Now, I saw that you have invested more on patterns or trying to see the trends. And from, as you said, Oxford, and you referenced way back, all of them show that there is a problem with, there is a problem that now we're going to have more floods. With the pillars that you showed us, there's a lot of money that was invested more on trends, on more equipment that shows us trends. Now, my question is, and I saw that the SAEON was now funded by the Science and Technology and Innovation, that department. But when I look at bulletin number 2, it says that South Africa needs to improve its EWS. Now, my question is, who is that person who's responsible for that? When you say South Africa, is it, I mean, the department is there? Yeah, I hope you understand my question. Like, my question is entirely based on the mere fact that I'm sure you, even when you started studying, they told you about the patterns that they are going up. But with you at the positions that you are, who is the person who is saying, okay, this is happening, and your data set said so? who is now responsible for the EWS to be implemented?
All right. So I think, so on the first point regarding the amount of money, it's actually not the amount that is invested. It is what the WMO says needs to be invested in the different pillars. And the reason why there is a big amount that is associated with the observations as well as the forecasting is because we still have gaps. Africa, for example, is known for having a really sparse observation network. Satellite information assists us. It really helps, especially when you've got some large-scale events. However, when it comes to localized events, you really would want to have in-situ observations that would really help with, really these early warning systems. And then similarly, we rely on models. Traditionally, we were using physics-based models. I showed the types of equations that would go into those. Those run on high-performance computers that are really expensive. If you look across the continent, you will find that there are a lot of countries that do not have such systems because of the expense that's just associated with them. So that is why the number, or in terms of the amount of money that needs to be invested in that area, it is really high. So when it comes to the early warning systems in South Africa, we have got different departments as well as different entities that are responsible for different things. I shared more about what we do at SAEON or at the NRF because that is where I work and that is why I'm showing you all that information. However, the country has the South African Weather Service Act. They have got a mandate to provide weather and climate warnings. In fact, according to that act, no one else in South Africa can issue a warning of severe weather. So it's only the South African Weather Service that can do that. They are an entity of government and they report to the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. And when they issue their warnings, they work closely with the NDMC, National Disaster Management Center, who are under KOGTA. So you can see there are different government departments that are responsible and really looking into this. Recently, we worked on a project with the Presidential Climate Commission where we were asking questions around where is the infrastructure needed. And we were saying everybody in South Africa that has got, or rather government entities that have got observation networks, let's work together to identify where do we need observations. And we came in as SAEON because we are under Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. Our mandate really is to support research. So that's why we've got landscapes as I've shown them. We are not trying to cover the whole country. However, the idea is to support research, but as we are supporting research, we know that our observations can really assist with early warning systems, which is why we work with the South African Weather Service and we're happy to share our data with them. So we are exchanging data with them so that we can do better with these early warning systems. So there are different government departments, DFFE working with its entity, the South African Weather Service. We contribute from the NRF perspective. Neville, who was asking questions, he is responsible for access, which is also assisting in research when it comes to climate. And then we've got KOGTA, which would work with NDMC and provincial structures and local structures to ensure that we improve across the value chain.
Thank you very much. Do we have further questions online?
We've got one question online.
Okay, please.
A question from Annelies Jooster. If one has data, for example, from a system such as a Davis weather station, would there be an interest in such data to be submitted? If so, where to?
Okay, I think we can. So I mentioned our the catalog or open data platform that we have within SAEON. So our interest is actually not just sharing the data that we have, but we also provide an opportunity for those that have got their own data that they would like to make available to the general public to upload the data onto our system. I think if you can just get in touch with us, if you can get in touch with SAEON, we will be able to assist with that. You can upload the data onto our system.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Then Mary Jane, I think we don't have any more questions here in in Stellenbosch and online, then I thank you very, very much for the very interesting talk that I think kickstarted lots of discussions. So thank you very much for that. And even science engagement, people that want to give you data. So I think that's a very good sign that we needed this talk. So thank you very much again. Thank you very much to the participants here. Thank you very much to the participants online. And we hope to see you soon in Stellenbosch, so that we can share some drinks and snacks with you next time, because we will do that just now.
All right. No, I hope I'll be able to come next time. Thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the nice talk. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Plan, there should be some drinks and snack outside.
Cheers. Cheers, MJ. I need to call you.